Hello, folks, to those hopping in for the first time. We just give this webinar like a minute or so to populate with registrants, and then we'll go ahead and get started. So just bear with us for like a minute or so. All right. I'm just going to put a little welcome message in the chat, and then I think we'll be good to go. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Welcome to another Capital Connection webinar with the Michigan Environmental Council. My name is Bo Brockett. I'm the communications coordinator for the organization. And these webinars, if you're new, are ways that we try to connect you with some real-time big issues across the state and in Lansing at the Capitol itself. I'm here today with Todd Scott, Mark Wallace, and Christina Peltier to talk about the Joe Lewis Greenway. And I think it comes at a great time. We just wrapped up the summer season, which has historically been a great time for the outdoors, for people to go outside, walk, run, just take in nature. And I was thinking back a little while ago about how many more people studies have shown have come outdoors and have started to use kind of like their nature nearby because of the pandemic. And I think this topic is real pertinent today. Again, because we're coming off that summer season, that summer high, and the Joe Lewis Greenway in many ways, as we'll find out, is kind of a great way to get people better connected to nature and better connected to their communities in places that have historically been where it's been historically been tough to do so. So Todd, Mark, Christina, thanks for joining us today.
It's great to be here.
And then before we begin, just want to give a quick rundown, some housekeeping items for those new. If you have any questions for us midway through the conversation, feel free to put them in the Q&A tab on like your little webinar toolbar. If you have any like comments or responses that you want to give, feel free to put them in the chat. And then if we're unable to get to your questions, or if you have to dip out of this webinar before it ends, know that we'll send a recording of the webinar and answers to all your questions in a follow-up email, either this weekend or early next week. All right, so I think before we get into the Greenway itself, would you three maybe mind kind of introducing yourselves, the roles that you play, in your jobs, and then how those kind of connect to the Joe Lewis Greenway project itself? Todd, if you want to kick things off.
Sure, yeah. So Todd Scott, I'm the executive director for the Detroit Greenways Coalition. And I think the way the Greenways Coalition came about is really tied directly to the Joe Lewis Greenway. In the early days, the city of Detroit was not prioritizing greenways. This was pre-bankruptcy, like 15 years ago. And a lot of nonprofits were building these greenways. Some had the resources to manage them, others did not, and it was a struggle. And so Michigan Trails and Greenways Alliance, along with the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan, brought these groups together. And that became the basis for the Detroit Greenways Coalition in 2007. And then we decided we didn't need another nonprofit in Detroit to work on trails until the Joe Lewis Greenway came about, which didn't have a champion for it and didn't have the resources and capacity to push that project forward. And so we decided at that point to become a nonprofit and really help push the Joe Lewis Greenway forward. And fortunately, things have changed post-bankruptcy, with the city really taking control of greenways and putting great resources towards it. So we've really kind of felt like we've piloted the Greenway and have stepped back as the city has taken the reins.
That's great. That's great. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Wallace, President and CEO of the Detroit Riverfront Conservancy. I'm dialing in from beautiful Gabriel Shard Park right here on the Detroit Riverfront. Try not to get anybody too dizzy, but right in the shadow of the Belle Isle Bridge. We are the nonprofit that has constructed the Detroit Riverfront. We raised the money for that transformation. We have partnered very closely with the city of Detroit. many others to make this dream a reality. And the riverfront has become one of the most important public spaces and series of parks and trails anywhere in the country. We have 3 million visitors on an annual basis. We have seen over $2 billion of economic activity adjacent to the riverfront. And most importantly, we've been able to take an incredibly blighted area and turn it into a natural space that supports the ecosystem here, both of the river and also the flyways and wildlife that exist in this area. The idea of the Detroit Riverfront being a series of parks and trails is a relatively simple idea. It didn't take a genius to come up with this, but it really benefited from the leadership of the Kresge Foundation, General Motors, and the city of Detroit, who took the lead on assembling a lot of this property, all coming together to make this initial transformation possible. Gabriel Richard is a culmination of the 3.5-mile vision that we started with to go from the Joe Lewis Arena, where hockey used to be played, to the Belle Isle Bridge. Our vision now extends down to the Ambassador Bridge in Riverside Park, which the city's done an amazing job of transforming recently. And we are also part of the Joe Lewis Greenway Loop. We manage the DeQuinder Cut, which was built by the city. And yeah, I don't think it took any one genius to think that we should have public space on the waterfront, but I do think the idea of parks and trails really benefited from the leadership of Todd and his group, Tom Wywoody and others from the Community Foundation, who had seen the impact of these spaces on other parts of the country. And we're really excited to have Christina and the city doing a tremendous job of leading a huge vision for a bigger system of those that includes many more neighborhoods in the city of Detroit.
That's great.
Christina Peltier. I'm with the General Services Department, started with the Planning Department in 2008. I'm very thankful to the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation, who funded the Joe Lewis Greenway Framework Plan, formerly known as the Inner Circle Greenway. And again, there's no way it could have happened without the support of the Greenway Coalition advocating for these spaces so many years ago. So I'm leading more the planning, urban planning side of the project, and was the one who led the framework plan action.
Great. And then before we kind of get into the specifics of the Greenway itself, Todd, the word Greenway is in your organization's name. And before I heard about the Joe Lewis Greenway, I wasn't too familiar with it in practice. I'd only heard about the word Greenway, like in some books, when I was in college, things like that. What is different about a Greenway than, say, like your typical pedestrian trail that we might be familiar with?
I think our definition is very broad compared to others, and it's built upon the foundation that the Community Foundation for Southeast Michigan set when they said a greenway. It can be green in terms of color, but also in terms of the environmental aspects of moving along that corridor. But I mean, greenways are typically linear parks that connect features along the way. And, we had this big discussion early on with our organization because, back in the day, the city didn't have the ability to put greenways everywhere. And so we were looking at just putting paint on the road as bike lanes, and people said, well, that's not really a greenway. But now we're starting to see where the city is making more investments in these bike lanes, making them much nicer, separated from traffic, and they do really feel like they're a green way of getting around. And so I think one other aspect that has changed a little bit too is we're now getting more involved with climate change and really green transportation. So these are a green way of getting around and helping the planet. And also in terms of saving money for a lot of Detroiters, owning a car is very expensive, and these can be a green way to get around, monetarily speaking.
Great. Always a fan of multiple uses of like like your figurative language there. That's great. And it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, Todd, but just to kind of like paraphrase what you said, that greenways in a sense are more than just the trail itself. It's a bit about the space around it and how it like works with other aspects of the city in terms of getting people from one place to another. Yeah,
there has to be a connection element to it. It has to take you someplace. And like, not every neighborhood is going to have a river that you can put a greenway along. It's not going to have an abandoned rail corridor, and the city's starting to put in greenways through neighborhoods. For example, in the Fitzgerald neighborhood, where there was, they made use of a street, an alley, some abandoned properties that the city had owned, and they built this connecting greenway to the Ella Fitzgerald Park. So it's an expanded definition of what a greenway can be. And I think the Joe Lewis is going to take it a whole nother step.
Great. And as you and Christina kind of hinted at, and you as well, Mark, that the Joe Lewis Greenway is a pretty substantial undertaking. It goes across multiple cities. It covers, I think, almost 24 neighborhoods, if I remember correctly. And it goes through those neighborhoods in a way that's really meant to benefit the residents nearby. Todd, I kind of pulled out a quote that you had, that second wave media had you, or that was featured in there, where you, to paraphrase, you talk about how the Joe Lewis Greenway can be of international importance when it's completed. I was wondering if, like, the three of you could speak to as to why the Greenway has such potential to be so globally recognized.
I can go really quick, and I apologize. I feel like I'm answering all the questions here, but I'm gonna disappear on the later questions here. But yeah, I think the connection to the Gordie Howe International Bridge is really what makes it international, and we really worked hard on making sure that that bridge had bike and pedestrian access to it, and we were successful in getting that done, and it'll be opened in 2024, 2025, and that connects all, not just the Joe Lewis Greenway, but everything that's happening in Detroit to everything that's happening in Canada. And you know, there's also these rail lines that connect Windsor all the way to Quebec City, and there's a rail line that connects Detroit to Chicago and beyond. And so, great opportunity for people who don't own a vehicle, want to go on a bike touring event, to throw their bike on the train, come to Detroit, and do the Joe Lewis Greenway and perhaps more, and head home. And I think it'll be a bucket list item for people wanting to cross over that bridge and do the Joe Lewis Greenway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you can think about the Detroit Riverfront, the DeQuinder Cut. Those are already pretty well, I would say, nationally recognized as they are. So another feature would definitely add to that. Christine, I'm sorry, I think I cut you off there.
Oh, that's okay. We're also getting recognized from the equity component. So the American Planning Association just awarded us a national grant for advancing diversity and social change. During the engagement process with the framework, we really tried to go where residents were. So we did our own engagement, but then attended 44 additional meetings as we were invited to come out. Residents are already using this greenway to get their neighborhoods rezoned, to purchase their side lots, to purchase commercial properties. So really trying to push that equity conversation into the point where we've already had visitors from Milwaukee, St. Louis, Chicago, wanting to learn what we're doing for the equity component.
Wow, there you go. And Christine, I think we'll get into this a little bit later, but yeah, really excited to follow up with that. I think one thing that might help maybe to get into that equity component and some of these other transportation natural feature components will be kind of get into the specifics about the Greenway itself. Would you mind talking about the different ways that the people who are making this Greenway possible have kind of envisioned it to be used, either from like an overall picture or from like a neighborhood by neighborhood basis?
I think it really started, what I've heard, and Todd can confirm if I'm correct, it was looking at the railways and how to connect them, but residents really transformed that. The goals they set through the framework is it's about equity and equality, connecting people to spaces they want to go to, safety. And in Detroit, we have a high crash rate, which I think Todd mentioned a bit briefly. We had the second highest bike fatality rate and fifth highest pedestrian fatality rate a couple of years back. So residents see this as a transportation corridor, not just for recreation. How can we connect to job trainings? How can we have our own businesses along the Greenway and in a safe route that's open 24 hours to get folks to jobs who don't have access to a vehicle, or to transit, including MOGO, bike share, and bus transit.
Gotcha. So this trail in many ways kind of follows those big corridors, so to speak, that people will tend to travel along, whether on bike. Crosses
a lot of the main corridors like Grand River. So a lot of those high traffic areas, and residents really helped design even the concept of how it would look, wanting separated paths wherever they could for fast and slow users, wanting amenities for runners. So residents really provided a lot of that direction.
Noted. And maybe this is a good opportunity too for me to share some pictures and of some current things that are under construction or that soon will be. Let me just do that real quick. So would you maybe mind, Christina, Mark, Todd, kind of going through some of these current projects that are under construction and some of the features that they might offer?
I can jump into that, and Todd, if you want to add. So this was a design that came out through the design and implementation engagement. So we had the regular framework engagement, but as we go through each neighborhood, we do more engagement. It was important to residents during the framework that the communities directly impacted had their own voice being heard for what was being designed. Anyone was welcome to the meetings, but we definitely targeted any flyering and advertisements in the immediately impacted communities. So we started construction in Midwest neighborhood. They created their own nonprofit called the Detroit Greenway Heritage Conservancy. They advocated for us to start in the community. They really saw the benefit of how this could bring in new housing, more job opportunities. And this is where you see that separated path. So this section is already under construction and will be open October 29th. We'll be having a ribbon cutting, which we'll show you an image about that later, but you see the separated paths. They also advocated for a more natural feel, less grass. So you'll see grass with field mix adjacent. And then they only wanted access from neighborhood connections or the major roads. So we made sure we had fencing to separate people's backyards for security reasons. So, but a lot of this design came out of those design and implementation meetings with those communities. And it was during the pandemic. So we actually went out in the community and did some meetings on lawns where we put out a big screen for those residents who didn't have access to internet. The path will have Wi-Fi, the full length, and also ways to plug in senior scooters in case they run out of power on the path. And again, that was all feedback we heard from the community. And I guess if you show the next slide. So the other thing we're thankful to the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation for is they funded the first trailhead entrance. So at Warren Avenue, this is an area that's in both Dearborn and the city of Detroit. In that neighborhood engagement, the community said they wanted an area where community members could meet. So there's a small meeting room here. They wanted avenues for local vendors, so food truck space, the outdoor pavilion, but they also wanted a large open lawn. They wanted playground, fitness equipment. And again, we're thankful to the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation for funding this Warren Trailhead. But again, that community input was essential of what is required by the community, what's preferred. And this pavilion will be open spring of next year.
That's great. Would you mind just at this point, just talking a bit about how those public discussions or public meetings kind of played out, how they're structured themselves, and then what you did with those results?
In this case, again, it was a challenge during the pandemic. So we did do Zoom for 4 meetings, asking what kind of amenities residents wanted to see. We had a survey, so residents could say if they wanted things more natural, what kind of amenities they wanted to see. And in the cases of people not having online access, we did the 2 meetings again in the neighborhood in person. A neighbor volunteered their house. We dropped a giant screen across the front porch and we put out chairs, and we walked around with cell phones so people could complete the survey online who might not feel comfortable with the technology. Mm-hmm. So at those first meetings, we had 100 to 150 people on the Zooms, and the neighborhood ones, it was more 25 to 30 people. And the final meeting we did in person, we kept it less formal, more what the community was looking for. Harvest Festival with bonfire pits, pumpkin carving for the kids, and we kept it more informal. They wanted to use that meeting as a community space just to get to know their neighbors. So we let Detroit Greenways Conservancy lead the meeting, and we were there to support. And we did that with both the in-person meetings. The community directed us to what their needs were, and then we came out and provided support.
That's great. And it's great to hear. I guess I don't have a number for comparison of maybe what your goals were, but to hear that 150 people were showing up on the Zoom meetings, I know it's how tough it can be to pull people out for public meetings as a former local news reporter. So great to hear.
The other thing that helped with that is we had an advisory council. So every council district had one representative. Our leadership took them down to the Atlanta Beltline just to hear about what challenges the Beltline faced. Mm-hmm. And those advisory council members really led the conversation of what did we need as far as engagement. It's great to engage people about the path, but they wanted to know how can they get the side lots? How will this impact their taxes? So they told us what information they needed. And again, we followed suit and supported.
That's great. That's great. Well, I know that kind of continuing the rendering streak we have going here, Mark, I know that the Southwest Greenway is really tied into the Riverfront Conservancy itself. Would you maybe mind talking a bit about how the Joe Lewis Greenway fits into your own vision and plans?
Yeah, so the riverfront has been open for coming up on 20 years now. Organization started in 2003, and we have a great track record of community engagement and a legacy of doing what we say we're going to. And that's one of the things that I encourage folks from around the state to think about as you're embarking on projects like these. Many communities like Detroit have been promised big things that have not been delivered. So I know that's top of mind for Christina and Todd. Yeah, everyone in leadership in nonprofits and in the civic leadership here is making good on our promises. And this connection into Southwest Detroit goes from Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Centennial Park, which is a really significant 22-acre park on the riverfront, over into the Corktown and Mexican Town neighborhood. For those of you familiar with the Michigan Central Station that Ford is renovating, that's right at Werner Highway, sort of where Mexican Town and Corktown intersect. And right at that spine is an old train line that has been turned into a tunnel, and we are building a pathway on top of that tunnel. And that's called the Southwest Greenway. You can see the rendering here, and it's currently under construction. This will be open in the middle of November this year, and you can see some of that construction, the connection up to Bagley Street. So really excited about this, and this builds on the work that the city did with the DeQuinder Cut, which is make it easier for people to get to the riverfront. Both Todd and Christina have talked about biking and those connections. When you look at bike lanes around town, Christina mentioned this, but we see a lot of people in electric wheelchairs. You see a lot of kids walking to school. So these are opportunities for us to provide mobility solutions in a way that brings people together. The other thing I'd note, and Christina's team has done a great job of this, is there are so many people in Detroit who feel left out of the renaissance of what's happening. And I'm sure that applies to other cities like Lansing, Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo. Any city of scale is seeing transformations of their downtowns or their suburbs, but those places where people come together are getting more rare. And the opportunity to see a physical change literally in your backyard is incredibly rare. So Christina is literally changing people's backyard experiences. In that initial move of going from a place that has not seen any change for decades to a space where there's a radical physical transformation that not only improves the quality of life for each individual, but also pulls people together. That checks a lot of boxes. So these projects might look like icing on the cake, but this is the cake. Cities exist because people want to be in proximity with each other. And these projects are one of the best ways to drive economic development and also achieve some of those health outcomes and some of those social changes that are so important for cities like Detroit.
That's fantastic. And one thing that I always have to wrap my head around is just how large not only Detroit is in terms of population, but also in terms of its size, its surface area. And yeah, that's a great point, Mark. I'm sure there are dozens of neighborhoods in Detroit, and over the past 20 years, 20 plus years, a lot of that revitalization, of course, hasn't happened in every single one of them. This is a great opportunity to start or continue that revitalization in many of those neighborhoods that haven't seen as much in years past.
That's right. And one of the things I'm so excited about Christina and her team at the city have done is try to focus on the primary beneficiaries being people who have stuck it out in those neighborhoods. In places like Atlanta and places like New York and Philadelphia, there's so much pressure and so much demand for expensive condos and new apartments that it's really hard to deliver that equity to the existing residents. But the neighborhoods that Christina's going through and the approach that the city's taking is really going to drive the primary benefit to people who have been there for generations. And it's thrilling. It's very different opportunity than any other city has, and a radically different approach from any other city. So I want to just applaud that from the city of Detroit side on the execution.
Yeah, and I know just following the Detroit or the Joe Lewis Greenway's Facebook page that not only we've talked about the mobility benefits, we've talked about the connectivity benefits and the natural benefits, but there's also been some benefits even just in the construction of the Greenway itself, kind of removing debris that's long been in some neighborhoods. Are there any other perks or benefits that the Joe Lewis Greenway, either in its construction or completion, that you want to tout, Christina, Mark, and Todd? Anything else that you want to make note of?
We're currently looking at ways to reduce barriers for people to start small businesses or vend along the Greenway. The city has contracted the planning and development team has contracted a study to do a neighborhood plan completely around the loop to see where can we support neighborhoods, what additional support's needed, from anything from housing to job connections. So we're constantly looking for ways to improve what we've started. But again, the first community really advocating for how can we be part of the Greenway from a business sense, looking at reducing those barriers and getting their neighborhood rezoned, helping residents skip property so they're benefiting from generational wealth that they can pass down to their kids.
Yeah. There was a question posed in the chat earlier asking if there was any worries about gentrification in these neighborhoods once the trail itself, the Greenway itself, is constructed. Have there been any concerns voiced by residents about that? And if so, how have you been able to respond to that?
Of course, there's concerns. Again, some of that is how do we take barriers away for small businesses? So gentrification is more just from the property, but it's also commercial businesses. How do we create that generational wealth? When residents couldn't buy side lots because their neighborhood had been rezoned industrial at some point, they advocated to get their neighborhood rezoned back to residential so they could get those side lots. That planning study will really inform more of what can we do to provide tools to slow down or prevent gentrification as much as we can. So we're actively trying to be dynamic, working with those communities, and the communities have different needs as you go around the loop.
That's right. Yeah, that's a fair point. Not every neighborhood's going to have the same needs and wants or worries. Yeah. Well, I'm taking a look at the time. I know we're getting close to the hour here. Christina, would you and Mark and Todd, would you want to kind of give us a sense of where the Joe Lewis Greenway is at right now and what sort of projects are going on and maybe soon will be?
Maybe we can skip ahead to the slide with the residents from Midwest neighborhood. So we have kicked off construction between Warren and Joy about a year ago. Again, that path will be opening up quite soon. We've started construction north on the rail corridor from Joy to Chicago and open to Fullerton, just starting to clear those areas. So here's some images just of how excited residents are that it's started. If you go to the next slide, you'll see we had a groundbreaking recently just on the 23rd for the next section from Open to Fullerton, so a different community. They're really excited to see the project come through. And on the 29th in October, we'll be doing a ribbon cutting. The playground is currently under construction, and we're hoping to have the path open for folks to ride from Joy south to Warren and see the completed sections, and as the completion finishes in spring as you get farther south Warren. So we hope as many people can come out as possible to the 29th. We'll have activities for kids. You'll get to ride on the path. We'll have scooter companies down there and all kinds of fun activities between 10 and 12.
That's fantastic. One last question for the three of you. Not all three of you have to answer this, but when you think about the Joe Lewis Greenway, maybe 20 years after it's completed, what do you hope the Detroit, neighborhoods or even the city of Detroit itself will look like because of the Greenway? Anything you're most excited about or hopeful about?
Yeah, one of the things we've seen on the riverfront is people get excited about the transformation. But what really sticks is the way people use the space. And I think there will be great rejoicing when these blighted areas become beautiful, natural landscapes with good stormwater plans and amazing environmental remediation. I think over time, we will realize that this changes the way people interact. So that's what I'm most excited about. Cities exist because people want to be around each other, and there are too many lonely people in our cities and frankly in our suburbs as well. Projects like this will bring people together. I guarantee that will happen. That's what I'm most excited about.
For me, is seeing the kids and the families currently part of the project, how they're owning it, and then being able to tell the generations after them, I was part of this, and to see those neighborhoods stabilize.
And I would say, even though the Joe Lewis Greenway, is 30 miles and connects up so many different neighborhoods, there's still a lot that it doesn't connect to. So I'd like to see the complete network of greenways, from the Connor Creek Greenway on the east side and the Rouge River Greenway on the west side connected to the Joe Lewis and in one big citywide network, so people can get everywhere they want to in a very green way.
Fantastic responses, each of you. Thank you. Todd, Mark, Christina, thanks so much for taking the time today to join us for this webinar. I know we went a little bit over, so really appreciate you hanging on there. And to all the registrants too who are attending live, thank you so much for tuning in, taking your lunch break with us. Really appreciate it. Finally, I want to thank the Capital Connection sponsors, CalSec Incorporated and the Dobsons, for their continued support of this series and for the environmental movement at large itself. Just some final notes for all of you all attending. Just want to give you a quick update on some future Capital Connection webinars going on. We have one next week with the Huron River Watershed Council, talking about a very tragic spill that recently happened along the Huron River itself, and how that can kind of be used to promote some polluter accountability in the future. And then the week after, we'll be talking with Groundworks Center about a railway that's gaining some traction that could connect northern Michigan to southeast Michigan. Again, thank you all so much for attending today. And for those that are attending live, keep a lookout for your email. We'll have more unanswered questions and a recording of this webinar coming your way soon. Thanks all.